Welcome to The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Syrett. Is it possible to travel backwards and forwards in time? Or is this simply the fodder of a good science fiction novel? Tonight, we'll meet two whistleblowers who allege they've both been involved in secret military time travel experiments. We'll also meet an experimental physicist who maintains that claims we've already secretly achieved time travel defies all rational and scientific thought. Our mission is to investigate these claims and follow the truth wherever it may lead. It is time to redefine reality.
Genetic enigma or a human alien hybrid.
There was at least two gunmen. One was firing from the nose.
History, media, technology can alter weather patterns.
Created by the corporation. The strain, not the answer.
Engineered by the Illuminati.
There's no doubt.
I'm here with Andrew Basiago, who is a lawyer in the state of Washington and a pioneer in time travel. Andrew, welcome to The Conspiracy Show.
Thank you, Richard.
Andrew, can you detail your involvement in Project Pegasus?
Project Pegasus was a classified defense-related research and development program that was undertaken in the late 1960s and early 1970s by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It was developing different forms of quantum access on behalf of the U.S. President, intelligence community, and military. That is to say, it was developing different forms of time travel so that time travel could be used to develop intelligence data to brief the president and executive branch agencies about aspects of the past and future that could then be used for contingency planning for future events.
Andrew, can you tell us when and how you became involved in Project Pegasus?
I was brought into Project Pegasus informally in 1967-68. My late father, Raymond F. Basiago, was a senior projects engineer for the Ralph M. Parsons Company. And he took me to the old Curtiss Wright Aeronautical Company facility in Woodridge, New Jersey. And in Building 68 at Curtiss Wright during those years, there was a room called the teleport. And in the front of the room, there was an object that consisted of two parenthesis-shaped armatures. And when you stood in the room, let's say about 10 feet from that device, it generated a shimmering curtain of what the discoverer of this device, the developer of this device, Nikola Tesla, called radiant energy. Radiant energy, Tesla found, is a form of energy that's latent and pervasive in the entire universe, and that when it is tapped from the quantum plenum, has the capacity to bend the fabric of time-space, so that when you jump through a field of such energy, you're physically relocated elsewhere on the face of our planet. So my father explained how we were going to jump through that field of energy and arrive in several seconds on a hillside somewhere else in the country. And we did so. He grabbed my hand and we jumped through the field of energy. And we entered an illuminated tunnel that was very similar to the accounts that people described during the near-death experience. The tunnel was a dense, luminous cylinder of light that was moving sort of along like streamers of smoke, but you could tell that it was light. We were moving very rapidly, and in several seconds we saw a pinprick of light in the distance, and it rapidly moved towards us and then very rapidly collided with us. And we found footfall in the destination that would be used for the next 5 years, Santa Fe, New Mexico.
If you were sitting across from Andrew Basiago and he told you that story, what would you think, what would you say?
My reaction is not to try to discredit him, but to try to find out the real truth underneath the statement.
How unlikely or likely is it that we have already achieved time travel, but it's being kept hidden from the public?
I'm a bit of a skeptic when it comes to believing what the government says. Responsible governments and responsible government servants and agencies might well consider that if time travel had been discovered and was working, say, via a secret government department, they would want to keep that absolutely secret. The idea of time travel being available, being known to certain government scientists, can we think together of an area in the past where it looked as if some ultimate disaster was about to happen? Let's think about the Cuban Missile Crisis. It seemed so out of character for the Russians to withdraw those missiles. But what if a time traveler had seen what was going to happen if, and had somehow communicated that global destruction danger and persuaded the Russians to go back? Or what if there were, shall we say, secret time travel conspiracies, as it were, in both the Kremlin and the White House?
What my dad later explained is that when he saw me standing next to him in Gettysburg in 1863, he said, "I knew then you were going to be in the project."
You've detailed your involvement in the teleportation aspect of Project Pegasus. What about your involvement in the time travel experiments?
By the fall of 1970, they were already moving us backward in time 12 hours. In other words, we would teleport to New Mexico, spend an entire day there involved in project activities, and then when we arrived via teleportation back at Curtiss-Wright, it was maybe 11 o'clock in the morning rather than 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And we asked them, you know, you're sending us back in time, aren't you? And they said, yes.
So tell me about this photograph where you're actually seen at the Gettysburg Address.
Well, they sent me to Gettysburg via a new technology in 1972 called plasma confinement.
So we see you in this picture in Gettysburg, and you're standing how?
I just decided that I would walk about 100 paces on a diagonal from the stage, and then stand with my left foot forward and my right foot to the right so that people looking over at me wouldn't see in fact, how large these shoes were. And then I would look in the opposite direction from where I knew Lincoln would soon be arriving on the right side of the dais to give the Gettysburg Address. And it was in that position, that odd position, wearing those grossly oversized men's shoes, that I was photographed by a contemporary photographer, in a photograph that's now known as the Josephine Cobb image of Lincoln at Gettysburg. What my dad later explained is that when he saw me standing next to him in Gettysburg in 1863, he said, "I knew then you were going to be in the project."
I spoke with a lawyer in the state of Washington. His name is Andrew Bashago, and he claims that as a child he was part of a time travel teleportation program that was conducted by DARPA. What do you make of that claim?
I think the military explores everything. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I wouldn't be stunned if the U.S. military, well, many military around the world, attempted such experiments. They've been known to do experiments that with little regard for human life and safety.
I mean, Project Pegasus was so deeply compartmentalized that there were even disagreements among some of the project principals about what was going on immediately inside the project.
The fact that they would, the various things they've done in psychology and all kinds of things. They will try pretty much anything. They have an infinite budget. And so I wouldn't be shocked if they have tried things. I'd be stunned if they made any progress whatsoever.
A reporter claims to have run into the famous inventor Nikola Tesla at a coffee shop looking very shaken, and Tesla went on to explain to the reporter that he'd just been zapped in his laboratory with about 3.5 million volts, and went on to explain that he found himself outside his time frame reference, whatever that means. He also reported he could see the immediate past, present, and future. Was Nikola Tesla telling this reporter that he had achieved time travel, and what do you make of that claim?
Well, I think that 3.5 million volts can really affect your head. I'm sure he did see the past and the future, at least in his head. I don't think any time travel was involved.
When Nikola Tesla died in New York City in January of 1943, there were two teams that were racing to his apartment to seize his paperwork. Two were special agents with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The other two were intelligence officers for the War Department. And the War Department officers beat the FBI team there and seized Tesla's paperwork, his entire corpus of writings that were held there at his apartment. I learned during my investigation of Project Pegasus over the last 10 years that those papers were then forwarded to the individuals in the world that it would make the most sense to forward them to, the world's most distinguished physicists who were then gathering in Los Alamos. That is where time travel remains sequestered. It was weaponized during World War II, and the theory and practice of teleportation has been sequestered within the U.S. defense technical community since 1943.
You know, one has to remember that the Manhattan Project brought together the best and brightest physicists in the world, cost $5 billion or whatever it cost in 1945, and they made an atomic bomb. The thing you're talking about is so much beyond that, that you know, some number of scientists in the military could pull that off is truly a remarkable thing.
The problem here has been that individuals currently theorizing about the feasibility of time travel have been denied access to the time travel technologies that have resulted in the classified defense technical realm as a result of being spontaneously discovered, seized by the U.S. Department of Defense, and then developed secretly over many decades. And so we're in a bit of a historical interregnum here where a number of physicists contributed ideas and devices to the U.S. defense effort so that time travel emerged secretly under the aegis of the U.S. Department of Defense. But brilliant luminaries of our time, like Dr. Michio Kaku and Dr. Stephen Hawking, cannot speak authoritatively about time travel because they don't know what the state of the art is.
There is nothing in Einstein's great theories which make time travel impossible. In fact, they point rather in its favor than against it.
Do any of Einstein's theories even allow for time travel or the creation of a time travel device?
He would be rolling in his grave if he thought that that was true. The special theory of relativity, the first one that he came out with in 1905, specifically has in it causality, and it's specifically set up so that you absolutely cannot have time travel.
I would prefer to phrase it as, there is nothing in Einstein's great theories which make time travel impossible. In fact, they point rather in its favor than against it.
And one has to be very explicit when you say time travel. We're really talking about traveling backwards in time.
So during those years, I found myself essentially taking these trips to the past so that I could interact with that past event and gather intelligence data, and then we would be debriefed when we returned to New Jersey. So I visited different locations in the primordial past, in the ancient past, the modern past, and in the immediate past.
Backwards in time is completely not acceptable, and that's because it's backwards in time where you could upset the balance of cause and effect.
Nothing is so ridiculous that we should laugh it out of the room.
They were continually sending me back to the site of President Lincoln's assassination on April 14th of 1865. And I don't think they were really trying to explore that historical question so much as they were trying to see whether if they sent the same child to the same point in time, whether the same events would result. And every time I was sent there, he was assassinated.
Einstein to Einstein, causality, cause and effect, is absolutely sacrosanct. And so there's no way in his theories he would allow such a thing. I mean, as a matter of fact, the reason why he disliked quantum mechanics so much was because it allowed on a microscopic level, some level, acausality. And that was the one thing he rejected completely. So he would say that his theories have built into them the fact that you cannot go backwards in time. Forwards in time is easy, actually.
You just said that traveling forward in time is easy. You got to explain that one, Scott.
Well, there's the thing called the twin paradox. okay, which is a very famous thing that came out of special relativity. And the idea being you have two twins, one stays on Earth, one goes off in a rocket ship and comes back.
If you were to leave Earth on a voyage into the universe in a very, very fast spaceship, and you and I synchronized our watches before you left, when you returned, our watches would no longer be synchronized.
The person that comes back, for them, it's 2050, but in fact, it's 2100 on Earth. So in fact, they have moved forward 50 years in time, in that sense. So they would come back to an Earth which is the future from their perspective in terms of where they are. So and that's actually been a measured effect. We've measured it using airplanes. You put a very precise clock on an airplane and circle the Earth, and the time on that clock is a little bit less than the time on the clock that was left there. So that's a measured effect. It's not even hypothetical.
So speed and energy, that is the energy which enabled the speed to be achieved, appear to have a very serious effect on time.
What the public needs to know, most especially today's time travel theorists who are still trying to develop time travel, is not only were different forms of time travel developed in the early 1970s, but by summer of 1971, the U.S. Defense Department had already proved the existence of the multiverse.
What about the concept of the multiverse? The idea that there are perhaps an infinite number of possibilities for the future, and each one of those is its own universe. So therefore, you could travel back in time, and if you created a paradox, you killed your grandfather, then you would create a universe where you don't exist. There would be another universe where you do exist. Wouldn't the multiverse then perhaps nullify the grandfather paradox and the obstacle to traveling back in time?
Well, except that if you go to another universe, then you're not really traveling back in time in your universe. You're traveling back in time in another universe. I mean, it's not clear to me that nullifies it. To me, it's in some senses sidestepping the question, I think. You know, when one talks about time travel, you're really talking about traveling back in time in your universe to your, the universe you live in. To travel back in time in another universe doesn't seem to me to be sort of quite as satisfying and I don't think that's what people really mean. You know, if you kill your grandfather in another universe, then you don't exist. Well, is that traveling back in time? I don't know. You know. But certainly the multiverse, mathematically, it's quite a robust idea. When you get to the state where space-time and bending is extreme, then you can generate some of these effects, like wormholes and things like that. So that's the idea. But this is nowhere near practically realizable at this point.
The great theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking has gone on record as saying that one day mankind will be able to travel into the distant future. He stresses, however, that this time travel will be limited to a forward motion. What then are we to make of the remarkably sincere account from lawyer Andrew Basiago, who claims he was part of a time travel experiment and he himself traveled backwards and forwards in time?
I think they should believe me because I've spent 12 years now investigating my personal direct experiences in a classified U.S. defense project. I've gathered literally hundreds of facts regarding the people, the places, the technologies, and the time travel experiences that I had. Now, I'm a bright individual. I'm a Cambridge-educated lawyer, a past member of Mensa. But I am not Ray Bradbury. I am not a creative writing genius. I'm a journalist and a lawyer. And I've spent 12 years now gathering as much information as I can, and I'm simply telling it so that other people have the benefit of knowing that these things took place.
Is it possible that mainstream physicists who negate a present capability to time travel are simply wrong? Or are they guilty of what one researcher has called faulty scientific due diligence with respect to quantum access time travel technology?
In that sense, I don't think it has so much to do with time travel as it has to do with the structure of general relativity and the structure of physical theories that that do have limits that are basically nonsensical. When you get to the state where space-time and bending is extreme, then you can generate some of these effects, like wormholes and things like that. So that's the idea, but this is nowhere near practically realizable at this point.
The whole problem is that we shake our heads at fundamentalist religion of various kinds and say, well, the guy's just closed his mind to all the other possibilities. But there is a danger of fundamentalism in science, and a number of concepts have become ingrained in the traditional scientific teaching that goes on in the leading universities and in the leading research companies.
For me, H.G. Wells said it best. We all have our own time machines. Those that take us back are memories, and those that carry us forward are dreams. And now, we'd like to know what you think. You can contact us here at The Conspiracy Show through our website, www.theconspiracyshow.com. In the meantime, don't be afraid. Move over, Aphrodite, I'm coming home.